Hi, and welcome to another one of my Taking Control interviews that are designed to help you find ways to take control through your fertility journey and also find out where you can get support and learn some coping tips from various people in the industry. So today we've got Chris Lawson, who has experience of IVF himself with his wife. And has done a podcast called IVF Dad. And Chris has very kindly offered to speak to me today to help with the male fertility side, to talk about how it feels going through treatment as a man and how you can support yourselves through it. So thank you so much, Chris, and welcome.
Hey, my pleasure, Sarah.
It's really great. And we often talk about there's not as much support available for men going through treatment. And it's really important that we start raising the awareness of the fact that it affects men and women while they're going through treatment and infertility, that men need support too. And also that it's okay to talk about it. And that's something one of the reasons why you did your podcast, wasn't it? So to start off, could we just talk about kind of your journey, how you found the process of IVF and infertility from a man's perspective, and also the support available to you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose the journey started about sort of 2015, and I left it pretty late to start sort of the pregnancy journey. I was sort of 44 at the time. My wife was sort of 39. She's wife now, but girlfriend at the time. And it's one of those things where, you meet someone later on in life, and the great thing is you know quicker. But what we didn't realize was just how hard the fertility journey would be from that perspective afterwards. We both wanted kids. We didn't have kids before, and we wanted to crack on, so to speak. And thankfully now I've got a 20-month-old daughter, Rosie, which is amazing. But it was an incredibly tough journey. It was 6 years. We had 18 embryos, sort of a number of miscarriages, and as you know, the ups and downs through that process, as you have to sort of dust yourself off and then become more positive and go, right, well, this one's going to be the one, and go through it again, can be incredibly draining and put a huge amount of pressure on your relationship as much as anything else. And as I was going through it, there was one moment that really sort of struck me. We were sort of probably midway through all of the cycles, and we were starting to think about egg donation or sperm donation as a potential route. And we're in the sort of the fertility clinic waiting room, and there's about sort of 10 people in there, and a couple of the females in there are sort of chatting to each other and sort of talking about what stage of the journey they're at. And I'm on my phone, and there's one other guy in there, which was rare, to be fair, to see another guy in there. And he's on his phone, and I just thought, do you know what? I feel pretty low. I'm a bit exhausted from trying to be the coach of the relationship and saying, come on, we can keep going, and it's all positive, rather than actually expressing how I thought and really looking at it from my perspective. I think it's one of those things, you're not carrying any of the physical burden, but you are carrying 50% of the mental burden, and you need to appreciate that. So I vowed that if we came out positively out the other side, I'd try and do something about that. I'd try and put my story down and help other guys or other couples think about it from a male perspective, which is where IVF Dad came from.
Yeah. And yeah, what you said there really resonated, because my husband said similar, that he felt he had to stay strong for me while we were going through it, because I was emotional and I was struggling. And I think a lot of men feel that they can't always show how they're feeling, that they don't want to, in case it adds to the burden on their wife or their partner. And they feel they have to be strong for it. And it can mean that you maybe don't get the support that you need. You maybe don't seek out the support you need. Do you think that's kind of quite common?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, we definitely moved on from, stereotypes of men not experience or showing feelings and, just having to tough it out. I think in sort of general life, I think, a lot of my friends are pretty good at expressing their sort of emotions. But when you come into a highly charged situation like sort of fertility treatment, where at the end of the day, you're not the one that's having needles or hormones sort of injected into your body, and you're there as a partner, but also as a onlooker sometimes. So finding your role in that can make you feel a bit helpless sometimes, I think. And as a result of it, you're not really sure how much of it should be about you and how much you should talk about how you're feeling versus looking after your other half. So I think that's one factor that plays a part. And I think the other factor that plays a part is it's an incredibly, I termed it in the podcast as like it's like a cruel game of roulette where you're betting on black, and everything is sort of put on one number, and if it doesn't come through, and yet the chances are pretty similar to roulette in some cases, certainly for us with the percent chances. And sometimes you're lucky and it all comes through, and sometimes you get those hopes up and it comes crashing down.
Yeah.
And I think those highs and lows was what I found very hard to deal with. And how do you keep realistic and practical whilst remaining hopeful and inspirational and positive at the same time, and trying to balance those mixed emotions, I think was important.
Yeah, and I think it's something that it comes up a lot that people struggle with. You want to feel hopeful that it could work when you go into your next cycle, but you also don't want to get your hopes up. And especially if you've had a failed cycle, I know going into my second cycle, I was a lot less hopeful because the only experience I had was that it hadn't worked. So I think it's trying to find that balance, isn't it? And how did you find the support that you received? Did you receive any support from the clinic, from anywhere while you were going through it, from a male perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, which is a few years down the line, I actually found that one of my best mates from a long time, actually, both his daughters were born in the same clinic via fertility treatment that we were at. And I thought, why has it taken 3 years for me to find out that fact? Because actually it would have been quite reassuring at the time. And my friends were there and absolutely prepared to talk about it, and they did, and they listened. But it's sometimes quite tough when they're almost, some of them are 18 years ahead on the fertility journey. Some of their kids are approaching 18, and I'm still trying to have one. And so I think I probably bottled it up a bit more with my friends because they were different bits. And I think as a guy, maybe it's for females as well, but as certainly from my perspective, dealing with that sympathy sometimes was quite tough. Sometimes you almost don't want to feel it. You don't want the sympathy from your friends. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It's almost, kind of the sympathy or pity, if you feel like, it may come across sometimes a bit like that. I think, I guess it's very difficult. We found similar that our friends were ahead of us in their fertility, in terms of their fertility, because nobody had problems. They were very understanding, not quite so far ahead, 2-3-year-olds they had at the time. But I'll often say, if you haven't been through it, it's very difficult to understand how desperately you want that child. I think if you've not struggled to get them, then people may sympathize a bit, but they can't fully empathize. And that's where I think the difference is, isn't it? They might, it comes across as sympathy as like, oh, well, never mind, or keep trying. Whereas empathy and people fully understand are a lot more practical around the solutions, a lot more eager to listen to how you're feeling, I guess.
Completely. And then I think the other reality was, I'm a researcher, I'm a planner. If we're going away on holiday, I'll look at lots of reviews or lots of places. So the internet was where I started, but such noise out there as to what's good and what's bad and what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. And also written very much from quite a female orientated perspective. Now, interestingly, when I decided to do IVF Dad, I thought the podcast would be the best way of doing it because it was quite private, and I thought that would be a sort of something that the guys would like to listen to, and that's worked really well, I think, because the way I've tried to design the podcast is that it tells the whole story from that thinking about the test through to doing the test, through to that first round, through to failed attempts and miscarriages, through to exploring alternatives, through to the success that is rosy at the end. The last episode is all about dealing with pregnancy after fertility treatment and all the emotions that comes up. So I think doing the podcast was a good way. But interestingly, since then, it's like there are definitely some more resources out there now than when I was looking before. There's some great guys doing some stuff. There's one on Instagram called The Man Cave, which I really respect, a guy called Kevin, a guy called Ian Stone, that's really helped sort of set some stuff up, and another guy called Toby Trice, who's really raising sort of fertility. So it's great to see there's more voices out there starting to make this a bit more, you know, just something that you talk about in day-to-day conversation rather than something you hide away.
Yeah, and like you said, I think when we all start talking more about it, suddenly we find out that people around us have been through it. Because I found the same thing once I started support groups. So many people I knew messaged me, if only we talked about it and felt comfortable talking about it, you could have supported each other through it.
Yeah.
And I think it's that whole thing of raising awareness and it becoming more socially acceptable, I guess, to talk about it. And definitely there's so many more resources now, especially for men. I think there's, over the last few years, I've certainly noticed that there's been a big push on supporting men and the understanding that men need support through it as well, which is great. And that kind of leads us on to, what advice could you give to other men who are in the process of going through it, about to start treatment, just from your perspective, what you've learned or through talking to people since you've been through it?
I think the first thing for me is, when we went for our first consultation and the spotlight sort of, and obviously they were asking Trish about her medical history and the like, and then suddenly the spotlight came on me, and it was like, right, okay, so Chris, and obviously we need to do tests, and when you do the research and you understand how much male factor infertility is a part of that fertility process, and how at least half, if not more, of all sort of fertility issues are male related, and you think, you are an equal partner in this, and you need to, the sooner you start getting on in that process and your head around it, the better. To be fair, this isn't something where you're just there as a supporting member of the cast looking after your wife. What that plays a role, and it's also starting to reflect and think about what actually it means to be a father as well, and what's important. Is it genetics, or is it the way that you bring it up? And I think having those thoughts earlier on, and not, having sort of just one perspective on it, I think is really important. The second thing, I think, and it was hard, but Trish and I sort of sat down and we sort of talked about what we would consider, what we wouldn't consider, what the red lines were almost. And you can get absolutely wrapped up, and it's a little bit like the wedding industry in a minute, way. You start off thinking, right, well, we're just getting married, and before you know it, people go, oh, well, you also need this, and you also need this, and you also need this, and have you considered that? And before you know it, you're flying off to Barbados with 300 people or whatever, and it can feel like that within the fertility treatment as well. And I think setting out what's important to you, and what actually you can deal with as a couple, and what you can't deal with as a couple, and almost trying to have that as a framework, I think that was really valuable to us, really.
Yeah.
So I thought that was it. And then I think, if you feel so, as we were going through that process, and it was really tough at times, incredibly tough, and at points where I'm thinking, oh, I may never be a father, I may never be a in terms of having my own sort of genetic baby, and starting to consider whether we would need sort of sperm donation or egg donation. And I found it very useful to go and talk to someone. So talk to a sort of a therapist outside of it. Now the clinic offered counselling support, and indeed, when we were looking at the donation route, we had to, that was one of the requirements. We had to go for the counselling support. But I found it useful just having an outlet that I could talk to, just purely about how I was feeling from my perspective. Because although I think it's incredibly important to talk to your partner about it, you're also conscious about bringing them down. So it just provided a bit of a safe space just to do that, I think.
Yeah, and I think that outlet's really important, because I think, yes, it's definitely, you have to talk to each other going through it, but sometimes there's things you want to say that you maybe hold back on because you don't want to upset your partner, but actually you need to get them out and you need to work through those things, don't you? So I think having that separate appointment is great advice, actually.
Yeah. And find your avenue, find your release. Mine was running and music, so if I found running quite therapeutic, I always, even though I might not fancy going, I always felt better by the time I got back, and I found music as a bit of a release. And I think, you need to find those releases. You need to find something that, what you don't want to do is get consumed by fertility treatment. Your relationship isn't fertility treatment. It's a part of a journey of what you're on, and it's easily done to become slightly obsessive about it and think that's all we are, and it isn't. It's really important to keep your interest, keep the date nights going where you're not talking about it, and the like, and just sort of relax into it. I mean, again, you can read 10 different things and they can give you 10 different views on whether you should drink coffee or drink alcohol. And I was really quite impressed by the approach which our clinic took, which was about everything in moderation and just live your lives. And I think that's so important as well. You have to live your life and make sure that this is seen as something which isn't detracting from it, however hard it may be.
Yeah, because it's a long time. 6 years for you, which was the same for us. 6 years, it's a long time to not be happy, isn't it? And it is.
Yeah.
Although it's not saying you're not wanting a child, you're not working towards that, but it's a long time to be feeling where your life's on hold. There's nothing of joy in your life, and you need to build a life outside of trying to at least make sure that you've got something that gives you joy, that makes you happy, things like that, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a great example of that was that, we were going, right, well, we're do the fertility treatment, we're hopefully get pregnant and have a baby, and then we're going to get married. But our number one thing is we can get married at any time, but actually we're going to do it. Now, after about 4 years of that, I'm thinking, Christ, is this ever going to happen? We said, no, come on, we're just going to set a date and do that. And actually, I think both Trish and I love the fact that Rosie ended up being in the freezer waiting for us before we got married, and then we didn't put her back for another 9 months after that, and then the rest is history. But you have to carry on with your life. You have to find those sort of, like you say, joyful moments and make sure you keep that going, because I really do believe that state of mind, that calmness, although there might not be the medical evidence around some of it, I think it plays an incredibly important part.
Yeah, and I think even just in the state you're feeling for going into treatment and how you can cope with that, I think you're in a better state. And I think it starts to build resentment. We got to a point where I said we need to stop putting things on hold. So, but let's book a holiday, and if I'm pregnant we have to cancel, then great. I'm quite happy to do that. We'll buy buy a mini, because if I have to sell it, great. I'd much rather be pregnant than that. But you put things off, and then it gets to it, you think, well, I could have been doing it because it's not happened, and you almost doubly sad because you've missed out on doing something, say holiday with friends or something, and you're still not pregnant. And it's trying to build that life, isn't it, whilst you're going through it. You touched on a couple of things already about coping as a couple, but you've talked about talking about things together, talking about kind of the red lines and what you're happy with and what you're not, and also making time for each other. Is there anything else you found that helped you with coping as a couple that you'd advise?
I think dealing with disappointment is difficult, in all aspects of life, and you've got to see it as a bit of a grief curve, really. You go through every single emotion, and whether that's the fact that actually you're looking and it's a failed cycle, or sadly, the amount that end up in miscarriages as a result of the treatment as well. And you've just got to appreciate that you're going to go through, as a couple and individually, every single emotion there. There's going to be denial, there's going to be anger, there's going to be despair. and it's just letting that happen rather than trying to stop it happening. We used to find that we ended up like almost having a bit of a blowout after sort of each of the cycles. So we'd be really quite healthy, and we'd be looking and doing the positive stuff and making sure we weren't doing any stress. And then we'd get the disappointments, and we'd go off the rails for a little bit, or go out for a couple of nights and end up in sort of tears and I think it's important. I think what you can't do is try and control this. You have to sort of let it flow. I think that was important, and you need to do it together. And I do think, coming back to the emotional bit, there was points where I was almost trying to be strong for both of us, when actually what Trish wanted to see was that actually I was feeling vulnerable, and that this was affecting me as much as it was affecting her. And you can get yourself in a bit of a bind like that, where unless you communicate, before you know it, one of your partners is thinking that you don't care more as much as they do. And I think that's really, it's hard work working on the communication all the time and almost over communicating, and it can be exhausting and almost take out a little bit of the fun out of a relationship in a way, because it feels a bit forced. But I think it's really important, because this is a life-changing event, which quite frankly, I think everyone underestimates how traumatic it can feel at certain points. So I think you've got to keep checking in with each other.
Yeah, because you don't want to get to the end of the journey, whatever the result is, and find that you don't have that relationship there anymore. That, whether you're successful or not, in having a child, or whatever route your parenthood you take, you don't want to get to the end and find that you're just so burnt out and you've lost all that communication, that there's nothing there as a couple. It's that coping as a couple, isn't it? And accepting that men and women do cope differently, and everybody's different. So no one person's going to be the same as the next. So the only way really is to communicate, because it's a common thing. And what I felt as well myself, if you're not communicating, you do start to think, well, they're not as bothered as I am. If you're the more emotional one, which I was, it's difficult, isn't it? So I think it's really important to, like I say, to communicate, to make sure you continue to work together on this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing is keeping an open mind as well. I mean, we started off, I was quite sort of, right, well, what we do, we look at the stats of a clinic, and we go with the one with the highest percent chance of the over 40s group, which we were in, and that just felt like the logical bit. And I always say that the first episode of IVF Dad is set up a fertility fair, and it's almost like a microcosm of a 5 or 6 years ahead, because on one side you've got all of the clinics, and on the other side you've got all of these alternative medicines, and whether that's massage or Chinese herbalists or nutritionists or whatever. And I was like, right, well, we're just clearly what we're going to do is just keep to the clinic side. And Trish was sort of almost pulling me more over to some of the alternative stuff. And who knows at the end of the day which bits were important and which bits weren't important. And we tried a lot of stuff, and some of it I think is just good healthy living and makes practical sense, and why wouldn't you do it anyway? And others you sort of think, really, was that a good value for money versus actually doing something else? And I think you've got to approach that as a couple. You've got to understand that one of you might have slightly different views as to what's important as part of this process as the other. And you, rather than almost stay rigid, it's trying to ebb and flow with that a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and it could be that those things help in certain ways. So say if your wife would want to try acupuncture, and it might be, well, logically doesn't necessarily, there's not necessarily proven to help, but actually it helps in lots of other ways, like helping with sleep, and it gives you somebody else to talk to. And I think some of those things may not be proven, but it might just be as a coping mechanism, they help the other partner cope better. And I think it's understanding why they're important, so that you're not paying out loads of money for something that won't help and could cause more problems, but also balancing that with things that help you cope whilst going through it.
No, definitely so.
Oh, that's brilliant, thank you. And so you've done podcast of IVF Dad, so there's a first series there. Where can people find that?
So they can find it on ivfdad.com, or follow me. You'll find me at sort of IVF Dad Podcast on Instagram, which I'm quite active on. And yeah, like I say, so it goes through that whole journey, looking at each different aspect of it. It's an interesting one because I wanted to document the whole journey, and I will definitely do another series because I think it brought up a whole load of issues which probably need some further investigation. One of the things that I'm going to do is there's a lady that features on the podcast a lot called Emma, who's the embryologist, and I went back and I met a lot of the staff that had been through the whole journey and asked some of the questions that I hadn't really asked at the time, or got them to re-explain points. And that whole point about when do you do genetic testing, or what does a DNA fragmentation test really do, or sperm DNA fragmentation test really do? So I think we're going to do a series, a mini series of looking at some of those male orientated issues a bit more from an embryologist perspective. So so watch out for that one. That will be like IVF Dad meets Emma the embryologist, but main place is ivfdad.com.
Yeah, that series sounds great because you don't always get that chance, do you, to speak to the embryologist when you're going through treatment, and actually they have a lot of answers. And whenever I speak to embryologists or do Q&As with them, it's always so helpful and so interesting. So that'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So fingers crossed. That's next on the plan. But look, I did this just to provide a perspective to couples, and it's wonderful actually. In a way, I thought it might just be the guys listening to it, but it's a lot of couples actually listening to it together, and I think it's helped almost sort of a female partner understand it from a male perspective. And as you know, it's one of those things. I always said, look, if I can just help one other couple, then that's job done for me, and that's all it's out there to do. So I hope it's useful.
I'm sure it is. And this interview has been brilliant, really like clear guidance, clear understanding of kind of what it was like for you, but also some really great advice there for other people who are going through it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And anything else I can do, please do let me know.
Thank you. And as always, if anybody wants to reach out to me, you're welcome to, and take care.